Hi, everyone. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with my colleague, Kenrick Cai, who is a senior reporter, Silicon Valley. Kenrick, welcome. We're talking, I guess, ChatGPT and all things generative AI this week. Based on, let's talk a little bit about the daily cover that you and Alex Conrad did, starting with. Are we at a tipping point? Because I feel like we've had so much news around this, including what you've covered. It just seems like it's escalating.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Diane. I think, Alex and we spoke to 60 plus people in the AI space, founders, investors, researchers, and I guess the backdrop with AI is, there have been so many hype cycles in the past, right? Like IBM's Deep Blue beating Gary Kasparov at chess back in 1998,
Age, yeah,
1996, something like that.
generation ago. Yeah.
Generations ago, and there's just been like multiple hype cycles where it's like, this AI is going to, take over the world, or it's going to like change the way you work. And I think it hasn't really manifested in a major way in the business side of things. It's caused a lot of investors to lose a lot of money because they made these bets that were speculative and it really seemed like it was taking off, but then, the business case didn't really take off. But I think what we're seeing now is that we are at a new tipping point, and things are really starting to take off. I think what's really new about, this latest AI hype cycle that's different and a lot more immediate than the past hype cycles is that it's like kind of the magic is right in the hands of the consumers, like they can just type in a sentence into a tool like ChatGPT or Dolly or Stable Diffusion, and then they can get, a whole paragraph's answer or like a whole
Yeah,
generated
they can do your
essay.
essay for you and pass
Yeah,
the Wharton
right.
test and everything else. You mentioned other companies. So much of the attention's been on Chat GPT, and I know, of course, you guys spoke to Sam Altman and OpenAI and such. It's sucking the air out of the room. Is it markedly better than everyone else, or are there a lot of players out there?
Yeah, it's looking very much too early to tell right now. I think what makes OpenAI stand out from the crowd right now is um they're just, the highest valued company out of the startups in the space. They're at
Thank you,
29
Satya
billion.
Nadella.
Yeah, it's a big investment reportedly. So, they have that big lead. They have, a lot of that from a metric standpoint, they have, a lot of computing power from Microsoft, and that's really kind of made them stand out in terms of getting a lot of these tools out there. But from a technological standpoint, I think it's still too early to tell like who's really going to be that winner there. We spoke, for example, to Alex Wang at Scale, who provides a lot of the infrastructure tools, the picks and shovels to help these AI model companies to, make their models. And he was talking to me about how, OpenAI put out this tool, ChatGPT, um, this month, or I guess this would be in January.
Mm-hmm.
Another company called Anthropic, which was founded by a couple of former OpenAI researchers, they put out their own kind of chatbot tool called Claude. And
How does Claude compare to Chat GPT?
yeah, basically what Scale, I think, did like a sort of analysis of like the two and like inputting different use cases, like who's better at coding or who's better at answering like a mathematical question. And what they ended up finding out was like it was kind of a dead heat. It was they're both good at their own things, but neither of them was markedly better than the other. And what's really interesting there is, OpenAI has spent significantly more money training ChatGPT than Anthropic did Claude. So basically, I think the conclusion there is it's just way too early to tell like who's actually going to win this race. The kind of differentiation between the models is relatively similar right now because a lot of these companies are working with, the same buckets of data, just like all the
Well,
data that's
and
available
that's an
on the
interesting
internet.
point because if you step back and look at, say, the race for HIV cure, any sort of that the technology is developing in a pool and everybody essentially has access to it. So it's
Right.
not like there's a eureka moment. This really is the culmination of years and years of research and work that's been done into it. Like, talk a little bit about some of the other potential winners in this space. You spoke to 60 incredible number of people who are working here. Any other companies and names that emerged from your reporting?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think the big thing to consider with this whole AI race is that kind of the biggest benefactors right now are not necessarily these new companies or not even like I guess OpenAI isn't necessarily an upstart anymore, but they are, still one of the newer players in the arena. So far, I think the biggest benefactors have been just a lot of the cloud providers, the big tech folks, Google and Microsoft and Amazon that are providing a lot of the computing power. And I think we're starting to see now that these companies are, kind of getting a horse into the race in partnering with different companies in the space. And so that provides a big advantage to certain companies, OpenAI with Microsoft. We were reporting on Stability AI, who has a very deep partnership with Amazon, where they have some kind of arrangement where Amazon provided Stability with more than 4,000 NVIDIA GPUs, like these AI chips that
Yeah.
put together, kind of created one of the world's biggest supercomputers for Stability to run their models on. So this really popular image generation tool called Stable Diffusion was really made possible and powerful by that partnership. Besides that, I think we are seeing just a lot of new companies starting to emerge. One of the big kind of offshoot points was this paper that a bunch of Google researchers put out in 2017 called Attention is All You Need. And it basically invented this new paradigm for it's called the transformer that is kind of a new machine learning approach that has kind of made this whole generative boom kind of possible. And I guess it was just a really great technological breakthrough. And what we've seen now is like six of the eight researchers on that paper have left to start their own AI companies. And a lot of those are some of the most promising companies right now. So
Well,
you have companies like Cohere and Adept and Character AI. But
what
right now it
space
seems
are
like
they
they're
working in? When you talk about those companies, I mean, are they basically working on specific use cases for generative AI? Is it sort of helping to develop the technology further, or where would you say the general neighborhood is?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for some of those so I think there's two different categories, and
Uh-huh.
for some of the companies I was just mentioning, OpenAI, Stability, Cohere, Adept, they're creating kind of the models, the kind of base layers that that these new AI breakthroughs are coming from. So one example being ChatGPT, the underlying basis is something called GPT, which is a sort of text generation model. And then we were
Mm-hmm.
talking about Stable Diffusion earlier, which is a sort of text to image model. And then there are these kind of other like models that are being developed, and that's kind of like the foundational layer for all this AI. But then what we're also seeing is all these applications that are being built on top of the AI models. So I think something popular example might be like Lensa, the kind of selfie app that you just uh, upload a selfie of yourself, and then it kind of generates all these like really cool, outlandish selfies of you.
On a more sophisticated basis than we can already do with like dog ears and tongues and such, obviously.
Yeah,
Lenza.
totally. It'll like make you look like a astronaut or like a medieval warrior or something
I'm
like
going to
that.
check that out.
a
my
couple.
new profile. Let me ask, one of the things what happened, let's say with Cloud, was it did really sort of provide a foundation for this whole zero marginal cost economy where you saw this explosion of new businesses that were able to be created. I think I'm still curious as to whether this is really reinforcing the power of the Titans, or if we're seeing another opportunity here where it will unleash new creativity, new startups, probably a bit of both. But what sense are you getting?
Yeah, it's a big question that I was trying to get a sense of from talking to all these people, and it really does seem like the jury is still out, but I think to some extent, like this does most likely bolster the power of the Titans. Kind of going back to, for one, like the computing costs of all this. These cloud providers stand to just benefit a lot from you know powering these this AI in the first place. I think another thing that makes this AI paradigm shift different from certain other paradigm shifts is that a lot of this technology is very easy to integrate. Like even with something like Lenza, that's a totally new app that's built on top of Stable Diffusion, the image generation model that we were talking about earlier, and that was pretty relatively easy to kind of just like integrate that into an app and kind of just put this app out there, and they're making like at their peak, according to this company Sensor Tower that tracks like app store data, they're making like $2.5 million in a single day at their peak, just from like
Wow.
kind of quickly uploading
It's like Angry Birds territory, right?
yeah,
Which,
basically.
so,
But I think that kind of speaks to the point to your question of like the big tech. For them, like it's like even easier to be able to kind of integrate this technology, and then with companies like
and use it
Google.
as a service offering in essence, like as part of an enterprise package. Here now we've got this that you can do A, B, and C.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, this kind of feels very new in that this technology is kind of blowing up in these last couple months, but Google has had like a AI arm for 15 plus years that employs thousands of people, and they have this technology kind of, and a lot of it has been behind the scenes. We're starting to see it a little bit. Like if you use Gmail, there's like Smart Compose where it'll like automatically suggest like the next
Here's
sentence.
what you really want to say to your mother,
Yeah,
right? That kind of thing.
exactly.
Well, let me. One of the things that I think, in terms of the zeitgeist, there is the euphoria fear nexus, and it feels like at this point the economy is down, so there's job loss and there's concern about what the job gain is going to look like now that we've got these new tools. There's already concern about deep fakes and trust on the internet, and now we've got these tools. In general, what is the reaction around the use cases? I mean, we're already seeing AI generated, Seinfeld like comedies, and as I
Yeah.
mentioned, programs that are passing tests at Wharton. It does inspire a certain degree of fear as to where the human is in the equation. What are you
Sure.
sensing in terms of what the repercussions are of that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question.
Existential.
Existent. I think I mean to kind of tie a bow on your previous question too, like what we're seeing and what we're probably going to see like first before anything gets, too bonkers is just the application of these AI breakthroughs to business tools. So I think we'll see like more and more like for example, Microsoft integrating it into Word and Outlook, or you know,
Chatbots.
chatbots, the different tools that Google has, and that Meta can apply this AI to Facebook, and we'll probably see it more and more in business use cases like that, different productivity tools and things like that. But I think what you're touching on as the potential existential threat is very much something that people are starting to think about and be concerned about, and start to be thoughtful about.
Universal basic income comes back into the conversation, perhaps, as we look at
Absolutely, yeah,
jobs coming back. Um,
it's
any
top.
thoughts from the regulatory front? I mean, is this when we talk about a tipping point? It does that implies that we are in a sort of new playing field and a new level of interest. What are we tipping into?
Yeah, a lot of unanswered questions, I think. I mean, even to the existential threat, right? There's this term called artificial general intelligence, AGI, which kind of stands for this sort of hypothetical future AI that is sentient and like self-conscious and kind of gets to all the sci-fi promises of like what AI could be, right?
Comfort your dad or start a war? It depends.
Yeah. Um, and I think one of the really interesting takeaways from all the reporting that Alex and I did, Alex was talking to Sam Altman at OpenAI, who one of their company missions or their primary mission is to kind of build towards this AGI. And what Altman was telling us was it's quite possible that when we get there to full AGI, like we won't even recognize that we've already gotten there. So there are a lot of like kind of interesting repercussions or potential like exciting things that happen out of that. Altman was saying like that's the type of thing that could potentially, break capitalism. It could be something that, like you said, like reintroduces this whole universal basic income thing to the equation. I think before we get there, there are a lot of like just legal questions to be figured out, like some of them are kind of more on a very like basic regulatory front, like what is the what are IP rules here? What are the copyright rules for this whole new paradigm shift? Like OpenAI and Microsoft have been sued for purportedly kind of pirating, quote unquote, like programmers' code, and similarly, like Stability has a lawsuit from Getty Images for supposedly or allegedly kind of stealing all these images off of Getty servers and kind of using it to
We have
train
to
their
teach the
model.
program morals, perhaps. One of the things that has come up, of course, is just the whole nature of algorithmic bias. Some people have experimented with how they describe, say, Biden versus Trump, or you know, write me a poem, and how much is that from just to kind of tie this up from where you sit as somebody who's covering this. What are the questions that you have in your mind, both and the concerns and the opportunities? Let's start with the questions you have coming out of this exercise of essentially doing a deep dive on something we're just hearing about, bits and pieces every week.
Yeah, totally. I think it would be two things. One of them is like, how do we resolve these issues of bias and accuracy, which are still, very much still there. I think they've been kind of a hot debate point as far as this AI technology goes for years. But just because we've reached this kind of tipping point from a business standpoint doesn't mean those issues have been resolved yet. And from talking to some of the folks for for this story, we found like when ChatGPT writes a job description, there are still elements of bias in there, and interesting takeaway from a conversation with Kieran Snyder, who is CEO of a company called Textio, I think,
Yeah.
which kind of is a recruiting startup, but she inputted like some of these uh, job descriptions into ChatGPT, and some of the most compelling like job recruiting descriptions were the ones that had the most bias. So, it's still very much an issue there, and it's still very much an issue also in terms of like what is accurate, right? Like if you type something into ChatGPT, it'll very confidently like give you an answer, but the answer might not necessarily be the correct answer. So people in the AI space call that kind of hallucination, and there's still a lot of this like AI hallucinating, giving you these like answers that if you take at face value, they could like kind of screw up your business or kind of screw up your homework
Fire
answers.
everybody, right? Well, we've certainly seen examples of that without a machine operated tool. I mean, um,
So
there's
yeah, and I think
go ahead.
or yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I think the second thing is just like the more long-term existential question that we were kind of touching on earlier. I think kind of as far as regulations and as far as like who is making the decisions go, we're just barely at the start of that. We could see like kind of a 2010s type of, you know, all these congressional hearings with these social media companies.
We saw how that went.
Yeah, and talking to some of these researchers in the AI space, it seems like that could very much be a similar thing that will happen with certain AI companies, where they'll need to answer to different regulations in different places. We spoke to a researcher at Harvard, Aviv Ovadia, who said, you know, kind of, we need policy making at the speed of, you know, this technology, and it's because, you know, this could have really big impacts on just the way that, you know, basic core tenets of our democracy, like free speech and, you know, dissemination of truthful information, like how that stuff is affected. Like at a very onerous hypothetical, like these things could be used to generate like fake videos of, you know, a violent riot happening or something like that.
Right,
So
which is
um,
interesting. I mean, one of the things that two other points I think are worth touching on right now. One is that as we're saying this, there is a alleged Chinese a balloon that's spying us. We've seen conversations about TikTok in Congress. Obviously, there's a lot of innovation happening right now in China. We've got the regulatory environment in Europe. Let's step outside the U.S. I know this wasn't the focus of your story, but how much are we ahead of the curve, or are we really sort of operating in parallel, especially with China, where there's so much innovation we haven't been talking about?
yeah, it's a good question.
To be determined, perhaps, because again, it's not the most transparent of places when it comes to that.
I do think a lot of it is to be determined, but China is very much a prolific threat or competitor, however you want to perceive that. As far as this race goes, I think there have been statistics out about how uh, China has now lapped the US in terms of the amount of AI research papers that are coming out of China versus coming out of the United States. And, you know, there's very much a kind of walled garden situation where China is developing its own set of AI technologies and the US is developing our own set of AI technologies. And so it's still kind of TBD, like where that's going to go. But I think there's very much a big question there that is like causing US government, for example, to kind of start looking at Silicon Valley deeper and deeper, you know, whereas like China very much, they're kind of figuring out their own strategies, like this AI Chips Act, for example, that Biden put forth, that kind of could be a damper for China's efforts, you know, not being able to acquire so many NVIDIA chips anymore. But I think, you know, they have their own kind of plays that are still coming.
And one other question, Kenrick, which is, there's a certain kind of Orwellian fear factor tone I know that has been certainly in the headlines. But in Silicon Valley, I also think there must be a lot of conversation around the opportunity, the excitement, especially in realms like healthcare, et cetera. What is the general tone you're hearing, and where do you think are there particular pockets of excitement that we should watch in terms of how this plays out and how it can transform certain industries?
Yeah, totally. I think it's the overall sentiment in Silicon Valley around this technology is like a very excited one. I mean, I feel like all the conversations that I was having at the end of 2022 with investors was just like these, you know, onerous times as far as the market goes. And then now we're looking at what's happening in AI investment, and it's as if this market were not the way it was. You know, it's as if like everything was still up
New
into the
year, new
play.
day, right?
Yeah, but I think like that kind of the reason for that is because kind of this AI has gotten to that tipping point where people are starting to imagine all sorts of things that could completely change, the way that we work or the way that we live, and I think the most exciting companies to come out of this technology probably have not been founded yet and, are probably in use cases that we haven't really seen the AI touch yet,
Yeah.
like I think the most exciting places are like healthcare or education, and just like thinking about a kind of basic like next step example, right? Like can ChatGPT get to the point where it can be a personalized one-on-one therapist or personalized one-on-one tutor, something like that. But we're seeing like a lot of developments in drug discovery and like figuring out how to cure different diseases. And I think there are a lot of promising ways that this technology is going to just really supercharge, hopefully, benefits for humanity. Uh, on the other hand, guardrails are necessary
Yeah.
to make sure
Well,
that it doesn't.
exciting days to come. This is no doubt the year of generative AI, and look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks for joining us, Kenrick.
Thanks so much for having me, Diane.